GONKCAST, a long-form discussion podcast about the music of English electronic duo Autechre, album by album, EP by EP. I'm Gabe.
I'm Dan.
And on this episode, we're kicking off our new Autechre Revisited series with a deep dive into Autechre's 2005 LP, Untilted. Now, the goals of this series are twofold. First, it's been about 5 years, I can't believe that, since we first worked our way through the entire AE discography on the original run of this podcast. And it feels like high time to revisit some key records and see how our feelings have or have not evolved. But while we're at it, we want to differentiate these episodes by being more backward looking. On our earlier episodes, we progressed through the discography chronologically, as you might expect, and focused a lot on each record's relationship with the ones that came before it. This time, with the benefit of hindsight, we're going to think more about what happened next, and especially about the ways the release in question might have led AE to their current work on 2022 Dash. In fact, we chose to start here because we kept seeing people compare the sound of 2022 Dash, and especially the most recent set E, played throughout the US tour, to Untilted. So we'll see about that. Now, before we get started, don't forget that we've launched a Patreon where for just $5 a month, you'll get bi-weekly bonus episodes on AE adjacent music, plus the opportunity to vote on future bonus episode topics. Last week, for example, our subscribers decided we should do an episode on Kraftwerk's 1981 classic Computer World. That was fun, wasn't it, Dan?
Yeah, that was a pretty good one. It's fun to talk about a record we love, you know.
Yeah, and that's like an especially interesting record. I don't even think I fully appreciated it until we started talking about it, but there is like so much to say about it. I also realized, Dan, that I was like, could that be the first record we've talked about on this entire podcast with lyrics?
Yeah, more than just like, a little quick sample. I think so. It may have been.
Kind of weird.
I'm trying to think, did we ever do anything not at Autechre, like 5 years ago? I don't think so.
I don't think we did. No. So huge watershed moment for us. We've broken into the world of lyrics suddenly.
Wow.
Anyway, head over to patreon.com/GONKCAST and join us for those kinds of episodes. Shout out, by the way, to our newest subscribers, CP, Dave, and Tyler. And while we're on the topic, for our next bonus episode coming next week, the subscribers have chosen Tim Hecker's 2013 LP, Virgins. So look out for that and send us your thoughts about Tim Hecker's Virgins if you got them, gonkcastpod@gmail.com. For our next main episode, free for everybody as always, we're going to revisit Autechre's 1997 EP, Envain. Why, you ask? Well, it seems to us the most overtly hip-hop AE's ever been until set B of 2022 Dash, that is. We got an email from listener June who said, hope you're doing choruses next, kind of have to, in it. And it does make some sense, and we're definitely going to get to that. But I think what I'm actually trying to do, and maybe you're with me on this, Dan, is like try to avoid doing the chronological thing. You know what I mean? Challenge ourselves by kind of coming at it from all different kind of crazy angles and see what new topics arise.
Yeah, that, and I mean, honestly, just personally, we already did that. I don't want to bore myself with it again. I'd rather look at everything from different angles and different order and whatnot.
Yeah, but we will get to it because, as even a lot of listeners this episode point out, I mean, it's obviously a big, foreshadowing of what they're doing on 2022 Dash. But we'll get there. So revisit Envain for yourself and tell us what you think about it. Again, that's gonkcastpod@gmail.com. So I like to kind of start off with some corrections, leftovers from last time, maybe some news if there is some. First, I wanted to note that we are recording this episode a day late because Dan saw Shushu live last night, and we haven't talked about it. So how was it, Dan?
It wasn't what I expected. It was, they were doing, a few years ago they did their tour. They played the music for Twin Peaks, and I was lucky enough to see that. It was really awesome. And then this one was supposed to be Eraserhead, but it was like they played this video that like they made that was just a lot of weird pictures, like kind of like. It was pretty disappointing. It was kind of like real art school stuff. It's like, here's a picture of a fetish porn. That's shocking, right? Like a little amateurish. While they played like sort of a noise set, like they were sitting at a table. It literally felt like the noise fests that I have been to many times. It was kind of disappointing. They only played for 45 minutes.
Weird.
Yeah, I honestly didn't love it. I was pretty disappointed.
So you were like fully under the impression that they were going to do a live soundtrack to Eraserhead?
The like little blurb that the theater wrote like sort of implied that, I guess, but it was it was not. I don't know. It was called like Shushu called it Eraserhead, and they played like In Heaven, Everything Is Fine at the end. But otherwise, it didn't really have all that much to do with Eraserhead. It was just like a slideshow and kind of a half-assed drone set.
Very strange. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. But
yeah, I hate to like come right in, shit.
Yeah, way to start us off on like such a bad note.
I felt bad. I wanted to like it more.
Well, we got better news to get to next, which is over on Mastodon. Sean has shared his progress on preparing the next batch of 2022 Dash soundboards for release, writing, "In case anyone wonders how I'm getting on, I just got to San Francisco." That puts him roughly a third of the way through the currently unreleased shows with 24 to go. However, I don't know for sure if like some of those outstanding European sets are just getting left behind and he's just focusing on the US states, in which case he's not very far at all, but progress at least, right?
Yeah. I mean, somebody do the math, how many days we got left,
At this rate, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, I mean, yeah, part of what we're doing is like with this Autechre Revisited series is honestly like killing time until these next batches come out, which we'll kind of jump right back onto. But I think it'll be fun to kind of like, look at the backstory before we get there.
Definitely.
Here's an email we got from Tyler, who was kind of writing in a little belatedly about our end of the year list bonus episode we did a couple weeks back. Tyler says, "First, I don't think it's just you. I think the minimalist atmospheric jazz improv scene has taken off and is really a dominant force right now. This is something my music loving friends and I have talked about quite a bit in the last few years in the wake of Floating Points and Pharoah Sanders' Promises and Andre 3000's New Blue Sun. Side note, I was lucky enough to see a show in the New Blue Sun tour, and it was a very unique show, totally improvised, different show every night, and no music from the record at all. Andre 3000 contributing to that scene made it feel like it had somehow broken through, and there's an explosion of that stuff now. Second, I really liked hearing your recommendations. I was unfamiliar with more than half of the albums you guys put on your lists. Some of my favorite non-music podcasts end each episode with recommendations of books, movies, or TV shows to watch. Would you consider doing that on GONKCAST, ending the show with something you've really been vibing with lately that you think listeners might like, archival or new releases? I find it so hard to get good music recs these days. I was going to ask Dan what you think, but we kind of already talked about it behind the scenes and decided we would give it a shot, at least at the end of this episode.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, the only other podcasts I listen to, they do it, so why not steal an idea and do it ourselves?
Yeah, I don't want it to be like seem self-indulgent or whatever. You can write in and let us know if you don't give a shit and don't want us to mention that, but
or just turn it off. It's at the end of the episode.
Yeah, or just turn it off. Honestly, though, it always feels like kind of awkward, like to transition to the proper end of the episode, you know what I mean, when the conversation stops. So I think maybe this will work. We'll try it. The other last sort of thing up front here is Rob wrote in to say, you still have another episode on bootlegs to record. Autechre live at Flex in Vienna, for example. It's funny because, yes, before our hiatus, our like unexpected hiatus, we were in the middle of a bootleg series, and we had recorded one in Glasgow, which I think we'll probably talk a little bit about today, and the 2005 set in Glasgow, that is. And we were preparing, I think, to do that famous, I think it's 1996 set at Flex in Vienna, and then just never got back to it. Part of me, though, is kind of thinking, like, how long would we have to wait to set the record for biggest gap between a part one and a part two of a podcast?
Yeah. We got to get the award, so wait that long, yeah.
That could be ours.
Call up Guinness.
Yeah, that's right. All right, that's all the silly stuff up front here. We ready to dive into the episode proper?
Yeah. All right, little bit of background. Autechre released Untilted April 18th, 2005. It was their 8th studio album following Draft 730, released in 2003, and preceding Choristus, which was released in 2008. Looking back, it's possible to see Untilted as a significant turning point like Draft. It was meticulously sequenced by hand using an all-hardware setup, and according to Sean, everything was programmed, and we literally were just pressing go and capturing the output. And when asked specifically about the track Lyra, they replied, that was purely programmed, grid programmed, all on screen, just nudging MIDI events around. That track is totally just mousing it. In contrast, Choristus was created by recording hours and hours of improvised jams, which then got edited down and released in various versions. That's strikingly similar to Autechre's current MO on the live recorded 2022 Dash project. So one wonders if the work of hand sequencing Untilted was unpleasant enough to send them in the opposite creative direction, ultimately leading them to where we are now.
Yeah, we got a couple listener comments kind of on the same, making the same guess. Listener Eddie, for example, said, this record might represent the exhaustion of taking such a controlling and methodical approach to sequencing their music. I mean, the amount of effort that must have gone into creating Sublimate alone is exhausting to imagine. It makes sense that they would eventually go the more loose and live route they did with Choristus and beyond. And listener Joe said, how incredible is it that they actually sequenced all of this out by hand? I can't imagine how accomplished I would feel if I could press play on something I'd made and it sounded anything half as awesome as this. I also want to note these interesting comments about Untilted from Ask Autechre Anythings that took place since our previous episode on this record. First, when asked to explain the, quote, bone-dry atmosphere of Untilted, Sean replied, yeah, so a good chunk of that was done in a different, sparkier-sounding room to the previous two records, so it's mostly that, I think. And when asked if some of the multi-part tracks on Untilted started as different bits that were then patched together, Sean said some of them did, but most were written serially.
One more thing, the guys were asked why no EP had been released alongside this record, which had been their usual practice up until this point. Rob replied, really don't know, Jules. I think papers were saying we had been putting out too much stuff. And Sean said, I was moving house and things were a bit hectic. In fact, we should probably add that this move also influenced the direction of Choristus, since the guys were apparently stuck without studio gear for a while.
All right, so now that we're up to speed, I wonder if you can remember, Dan, how did you feel about Untilted before revisiting for this episode?
I was going to re-listen to the old episode to hear how I felt, but I realized I didn't want to influence myself with
I made
myself.
The same choice. Yeah, I decided not to.
Yeah, so I did. So I really have no idea what I said 5 years ago, but judging by my Rate Your Music score, I think I liked it. I think I was positive. I know it's never been my favorite Autechre record or anything, but it's not one I dislike. It's not one I reach for, all the time. It's sort of like one I'll play if I'm, in the midst of the discography or something. Nowadays.
Yeah, interesting. Actually, listener Rob had this to say, which is, I've been listening to your previous podcast on Untilted, and what a fascinating time capsule it is. Firstly, a lot of listeners and Gabe rave about its potential for a live show, which was prescient. I feel like I'll be interested to hear Dan's opinion on it now, as he was pretty cool on it. So there is that. I mean, for me, I've always been really hot on this record. I think it's kind of one of my go-tos, one of those records that I want to listen to Autechre, but I don't know what to pick. I'll kind of default to this one. I was kind of realizing that I think when I want really heady, kind of cerebral Autechre, I'll default to Confield or something. And then when I want, more bodily, physical, sort of dance floor sounding or feeling Autechre, I'll usually go for this record or maybe even Choristus a little bit. So it's really a long time favorite for me. I think, if I remember correctly, I loved it when we did that first episode. I've loved it ever since. I think it just has such a unique sound in their discography. I mean, it just doesn't sound like anything else. And I think it comes down to that bone dry sound, to quote that person from that Ask Autechre Anything, that, bone dry sound, that really extremely closeness of the recording quality. It sounds like, if you listen in headphones, it sounds like the sounds are like literally tapping on your skull or something. And if you listen in speakers, I remember harping on and on about this the last time we talked about it, but it sounds like your speaker is physically making that noise. Like it's actually glitching out, like the actual thing, instead of a recorded sound. You know, it really sounds unique, right?
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a point I wanted to ask you. Like, do you think this is a better headphone record or a speaker record? Because I was thinking a lot about that too. You know, even like I'm driving to the Shoo Shoo concert, I listened to this and stuff, and like, you know, in the car and all. So what do you think? You like it better on the speakers or the headphones?
Yeah, it's interesting because listener Rob had asked about this, and you know, I'll just read his email now. He said, having gone back and listened to your earlier podcast on Untilted, you both spoke about how aggressive and intense the production is. The percussion at the start of many of the tracks are pretty brutal on my headphones. It can make for a claustrophobic, headache-inducing experience. This can mean that it isn't a good album to hear whilst trying to do other things. I've recently bought the album on vinyl to play over speakers, and I wanted to see if that changes the experience much. In fact, Rob was also asking if either of us plan to get it was just last year they repressed Untilted on vinyl. I think they were selling it at the shows, but yeah, I think this is really a speaker record, honestly. I mean, it's interesting because when you listen to Glasgow, the 2005 bootleg, which honestly is probably the most famous celebrated Autechre bootleg. It was probably like the definitive live Autechre thing until they went like full blown crazy with the live recordings in 2015, you know, and ever since. But when you listen to that, I mean, obviously the quality is like a little bit imperfect, but it really sounds like they have kind of made everything a little bit wetter, you know, like it doesn't have that kind of bone dry sound. It almost sounds like Sean said, they were kind of working on this in what he describes as like a sparkier sounding room. I'm guessing there was like a lot of reverb and echo and stuff, and they were kind of controlling for that. But once they put it out into the world in live form, they clearly decided to give it a little bit more, you know, a little bit more reverb. Of course, that Glasgow set is really in the process of transitioning from the Untilted sound into the Chorustus sound. I mean, literally there are a bunch of Chorustus tracks, but it almost makes me think there was a little bit of course correction, like, I don't know. Does it make sense what I'm saying? I feel like actually you need a little bit of natural reverb in the room for it to sound exactly right.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much what I came to in my experiments. I think it does sound quite a bit better in speakers because of that. You like pick up, you know, your natural reverb. In headphones, like it can be like so claustrophobic and like. It got cold here, so like my allergies are acting up. You know, you get a little bit of a headache. This is not the most pleasant thing to be like right up in your head. You know, listening to all the time. You know, it sort of gave me that feeling. But that also that brings me to another question I have. How is this recorded? Like, is it just, you know, DI like straight into the computer, or are they like close miking speakers? You know what I mean?
I think
you know
it's got to be DI. I mean,
that's
really
what I was thinking too.
It really honestly reminds me of like, I don't know if this is going to be too esoteric, like not everybody will get what I'm saying, but if you ever are recording and you're using like a distortion pedal or something and you DI from the distortion pedal, like direct input from the distortion pedal instead of going to an amp and recording it, I think it sounds like shit. You know, it just is not how distortion is supposed to work, because distortion kind of like glitches out the sound, but then what makes it sound like, you know, big and warm, like, you know, and huge, like, I don't know, Mighty Bloody Valentine or something, that's like amplifiers, you know, they add that kind of like mushy quality that you want. But when it's just DI, you know, direct input, it just sounds like glitchy, destroyed shit. And I honestly feel like there is actually a lot of distortion on this record. There's a lot of buzz, a lot of feedback, but it has this like uncanny DI sound. You know, it's like so bizarre because they're really embracing what, in my opinion, it like always sounds bad when you try to do it that way, and using it for like this kind of uncanny effect. You know, another thing that this record reminded me a lot of is Jolin. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but you know, like a footwork artist who I also kind of associate with like a weird, uncanny sounding, like total lack of realistic reverb, you know, which sounds bizarre because you don't ever, even in the real world, you don't hear sounds with no reverb, you know, like that just doesn't exist. So when you're listening to it, it just sounds so bizarre. I mean, I got to imagine that like if Jolene listens to Autechre, which I bet she does, like this is probably her favorite record because it's like so uncanny and weird. But you think I'm right with like the DI kind of weird approach like that?
Yeah, that's like what I was thinking. But that Sean's comment about like the sparkier room and stuff like made me think. But I guess that just means them listening to playback and whatnot. But
yeah, that's what I'm imagining, right?
But yeah, I was just kind of I was sort of thinking like I really don't realize how any of these records. I mean, obviously at a certain point when it's just through Max, it makes more sense to just be DI or whatnot. I mean, that's even how AE 2022 is recorded now. But yeah, I was kind of wondering on this one. But
yeah, I mean,
think
in
you're
this
right.
case though, it's DI from hardware, so it's like a little bit
it's a little
different. And yeah, I don't know, it just creates like a really interesting sound. And of course the other thing, like I alluded to, is that makes this record unique is like just how much like frenetic energy there is. There's so much like stuttering and sputtering happening on every track. It just feels like these kind of like atoms bouncing around, you know what I mean? Like this kind of like potential vibration. It's really like interesting. And I'm guessing that is the reason that people have kind of been comparing the most recent 2022 Dash sets to this record in particular, just because of that crazy drum programming and that like insane energy. But it's interesting because I don't know, in retrospect, I kind of feel like it actually is not so much the precursor that I thought it was. This is how I went into this episode thinking like, oh yeah, this is like totally, they're back on this kind of wavelength. And listening to it now, I feel like it's maybe not actually that way. In fact, I wanted to read this email from listener Joe, who wrote in about this very topic. It said, I find this an interesting choice to start out with in terms of searching for the roots of the current live sets, because I would almost argue the exact opposite. I see the entire Electron era of Untilted, the 2005 to 08 live shows, and the QCU, Chorustus Cinematic Universe, as someone in an older episode named it, as the halfway point of their career where they shifted from their earlier approach to the path that would eventually get us to 2022 Dash. First of all, this era, including Chorustus, was the grand finale of them using physical gear, but Chorustus is the official beginning of Autechre's jam band era. Untilted's compositional approach also isn't too different from the previous song-based albums, which Chorustus began blowing out of the water with XI, LSEC, NTS, and 2022 Dash, each holding each other's beers, or in other words, like going even crazier in that kind of direction. What do you think, like having listened to this right after spending so much time with 2022 Dash, does it feel like a precursor or actually not?
I mean, I think there's certain parts about it. Like, I think certainly the percussion, especially like, what I remember of set E and I would say D a little bit too. Like that percussion, like just being so, kind of aggressive and in your face. And even the way this is like recorded, like how it's like, literally like feels like it's right up against you and stuff. Like, I feel like sometimes that's how 2022 Dash can feel, but otherwise, I don't know, this sort of feels like a very like embryonic version of that or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there are definitely some touchstones. Like there are moments in 2022 Dash that use that very like closely recorded technique. It sounds like it's inside your head or something. And other things that we'll point out as we kind of go through. But I just ended up deciding that actually the defining feature of this record is how kind of meticulously like handcrafted it is. And I kind of think of 2022 Dash as being the exact opposite, of trying to feel like kind of loose and alive and flowing and evolving. I mean, I think of, there was one listener, and we'll get to it in a minute, but like who kind of commented on the way that these multi-part pieces on this record kind of evolve, and feeling like it's kind of subtle. But to me, it actually feels like a lot of the transitions on this record are very like hard cuts. You know what I mean? They're like very hard turns in a new direction. And that, to me, it gives the impression of like being handcrafted rather than actually jammed out and explored. I mean, do you feel like when you listen to this record, it sounds handcrafted, or did they successfully hide that,
I mean, it's some of that percussion is like so crazy that I would never guess that it's handcrafted, because I would think like you'd have to be insane to do that. But when you have that knowledge, and I think, and then listen to it, like this week listening to it and stuff, like I was thinking a lot about that, like thinking about like what work it would take to program this and stuff, and then I feel like you can kind of you can kind of see it coming through a bit. And I think, like you said, like those transitions here are often like, this is the first part of the song, this is the second part of the song type thing, which leads, like that hand place sort of thing. Whereas like we were talking about with 2022 Dash, like a lot of those like cuts and stuff that, which of course are all fan designated anyways, but like a lot of those seemed like pretty nebulous, and we were like, kind of had some disagreements with some of them and all. Whereas here, I feel like, if you say the first part of the song, second part, I think we're like gonna know what we're each talking about, sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess I was just kind of struck this week by, and this is why I think this is a useful exercise to revisit some of these records, because in my mind, I always associated this as kind of like a reaction against Confield, that Confield was so digital, and it was like their first big foray into like, Max and like algorithmically generated, compositions and stuff like that. Actually, I think if you read like press around that record, they spent a lot of time kind of defending themselves, like, against accusations that it's just randomly generated or something like that. They're like, no, we're like really setting tight, things within which it can, like environments within which it can evolve, and all that stuff. So it kind of feels like with Draft and then this record, they were like, you know what, let's go back to a little bit of hardware and a little bit more like dancing and energy and bodily, all that stuff. But listening to it now in retrospect, I kind of group it much closer to Confield. I almost see it as the end of the Confield era, because it is so meticulous. It is just so like, that's what I kind of think of, right? Like when I think of the Confield era, and I think Chorus is coming next is almost like a return to, like a liberating return to simplicity in some ways. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get you. I mean, I think too in like AE 2022, like I was already saying, like the percussion, like the sound of the percussion, I think is what I see the most from Untilted in those sets. But like the way that percussion is, on Untilted, it is like so meticulous, and like when you really pay attention to it, it's often like kind of the same pattern looping over and over and stuff. Whereas like in 2022, we talked about it. I mean, I think in every set, like how things like always felt like they're being like chewed up and thrown around and more like everything like just constantly felt like changing. Where like Untilted like has a lot of forward motion. Like it's not. I don't, even when it is sort of looping, it always sort of feels like we're moving ahead. But it's in a very different way, I think, than 2022.
Yeah. So we'll keep talking about this as we move on. We have as always, a bunch of listeners wrote in with kind of, big picture thoughts, individual track thoughts. We'll get to those. But first, let me get on the table all of the kind of high level thoughts that we got in. Maybe, Dan, we can go back and forth on this. But listener June wrote in to say, after their software endeavors with Confield, best album by the way, and Draft 730, the album that got me into Autechre, AE turned back to trusty old hardware for their mid-2000s output. Most importantly, the Electron Machine Drum and Mono Machine Wombo combo. These two machines alone are incredible. Paired together, you wouldn't need anything else. I own a Digitone 2, and the sequencing is crazy, seriously fun. The electrons are Sean's side of the equipment, I believe, and to assume off what they used for the tour, Rob used an MPC 1000 and a Nord modular keyboard thing. One great thing I've heard about this album, focus on one element in the song, listen to it shift and develop over the course of the track, really shows how massive this album is.
Eddie says, I love that the music feels chaotic and disjointed and yet totally fluid. Each song seems to move forward relentlessly, though it's never totally clear what we're moving towards. It reminds me of the new live sets in that I find myself zoning in to the music so deeply I didn't notice the gradual changes, transforming the song one piece at a time, almost like a ship of Theseus. But after a few minutes, I look around and realize I'm standing in a totally different sonic space, unsure of how much time has passed or how I got there. Of course, the live sets seem to take their time a bit more, while Untilted seems slightly afraid to hang out on one vibe for too long. We never really arrive. We are continuously thrust forward through the unrelenting angular rhythms. This is maybe what turns people off to it as a record.
See, these are like those comments that I meant, which is like, I get what they're saying, that like it kind of has this shifting, evolving quality. And I think that's just because when you're hand sequencing everything, they are, they would get too bored, like just having the snare do the same thing over and over again for like minutes at a time. So they're always kind of like, it's always getting tinkered with, always messing, getting messed with. But I kind of think on the big level, like we were talking about earlier, like the tracks kind of turn on a dime more than they slowly evolve, right?
I agree, but to contradict myself a bit and and agree with the writer, I do feel like when I first was listening to this record, like that's sort of what I was feeling until I like really like, I'm taking notes, I'm zoning in, like I'm really paying attention, because like Eddie says here, like sometimes like the hypnotic effect or whatever of the music can like kind of make you zone out on that. And I think like maybe, I don't know if this is the right word, but like maybe give it the illusion of that like slow morphing. Whereas I think like once I really zoned in, paid attention, you see that it is like more of a rapid change.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I feel like illusion is the golden word here, because I kind of think this is like a meticulously hand-sequenced album that is trying to create the illusion of being like alive and improvised, that like it's got that kind of constantly changing, fluttering sound. But yeah, like when you spend enough time with it, maybe you like kind of, you start to notice how meticulous it really is. There's another thing actually I meant to bring up front, but this kind of leads us to it before we continue on with the emails. And we'll talk about this more, of course, but one thing I find so strange about this record is the weirdness of the track sequencing. We start with like 4 multi-part juggernauts in a row. Then we get 3 like much shorter, kind of steadier, even mellower, like it doesn't have that frenetic energy, pieces in a row. And then we end on Sublimit, which is kind of a return to the beginning, and you could say maybe it ties a bow on the record. We'll talk about it, but I cannot help but wonder if this record might flow better if it was like alternating instead of all the big ones and then all the small ones. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder, did this originally come out on vinyl? Yeah, it did. I see here. Yeah, so maybe that's always, some consideration of just like timing it to fit on wax. I hate when people say that.
I would love to listen to some vinyl, because it sounds like, I don't know, in my mind, like, I don't know, not a digital record, because it's so, because of that like very close recorded kind of glitchy quality, but I would be very interested to hear what it sounds like.
Yeah, the one listener had asked if we had bought it, and we forgot to answer, but I haven't. I tend to not buy like newer things, like brand new records. So I haven't, but yeah, I was thinking about that a bit today too, because like this sounds like so not vinyl, you know what I mean?
Yeah. What? Actually, I went looking for a vinyl rip like online and semi legally, and I couldn't find one. But I'll be very curious maybe when that pops up. What AE vinyl do you have, by the way? I don't know if I ever asked.
I have Incunabula through Chiastic, and then I have the NTS sessions.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting. Yeah, I'm just not a physical media guy, but I listen to semi-legal rips online. Okay, we will continue with the kind of big picture listener emails here. Listener Sunil said, "I have a fan theory that the track titled "The Trees" is referencing the expression "missing the forest for the trees," and maybe alluding to their approach to making Untilted as a whole. It seems to be a detail-focused album where larger structures are often nebulous, and the progression can have a stream of consciousness-like quality, while the moment-by-moment details are arranged meticulously. As a result, it has a way of feeling both jammy and exactingly planned at the same time. The beats are also very linear, meaning that the sounds rarely overlap, contributing to the individual beats sounding clean and discreet." That's a great point. That might actually resolve like exactly what we were just kind of trying to decide on?
Yeah, I think that's maybe a better put way of what I meant. It's like when you look at the whole, it feels one way, and when you look at the, when you look like microscopically at it, it's actually like a completely different thing. I really agree with that. Joe says, I see Untilted as a bit of a concept album out of virtually any other Autechre album. There seems to be the most consistent sonic unified concept to the songs. Virtually all of them start out at an energetic, frenetic, full blast and then undergo at least one major shift about halfway through the track and then unwind until there's close to nothing left. The general process happens on a lot of other Autechre tracks on other albums, and in my head, I've come to call this process untilting.
I love that. I love that so much. Honestly, honestly, since I read this email, I kept like noticing. I was like, hell yeah, this track is untilting right now. Like it's like kind of coming apart, like disappearing. And now I feel like that's gonna stick with me. Here's another one from listener Sunil, again, who says, when I think about how good the tracks are individually, it seems weird that I don't think of Untilted as one of my favorite Autechre albums. No doubt it's amazing, but when listening to it as a whole, it can start to wear on me. Basically, the intensity of the relatively narrow sound palette can start to feel a bit samey in spite of the frequent changes. I listened to it again straight through this week, but also in bits on my 15-minute drives, and I found I enjoyed it most in small doses. It's easy to miss how good tracks like Yera and The Trees are when trying to take in the whole thing. By the way, you said Lyra earlier, which I guess it could be a lowercase L, but I've always thought of it as Ira. Do we know what that letter is that starts it?
No, I just thought it was an L. I really didn't think about it. Huh.
All the other trucks are capitalized, so I don't know.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Ira. Well, I'll switch that then. June says, the real key to understanding the true intent of this album are the live sets. They're essential. The shows bring into focus everything and feels like what an album was actually teasing. Massive, ultra dancey sets. Glasgow is unbelievable, but there are some other amazing shows out there in bootleg form like Montreal, Hemsby, Dublin. Hope you enjoy Overblown Dynamics and Dower, which has a rendition of Utah.
Yeah, I am, and actually June was nice enough. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'll link. Well, you can find it on YouTube for yourself. But June had linked to like YouTube, bootlegs of all these different shows, which was really kind. Yeah, it is interesting because I think maybe we'll talk about this more. But like I was saying earlier, that Glasgow set, that like legendary bootleg, and it's maybe legendary in part because it is a soundboard. The rare soundboard bootleg. Mm-hmm. It is just so phenomenal. It is this weird kind of halfway point between Untilted and Chorustus, and in some ways, as June is implying, sounds like, fully delivering on some of the like promise or even rough ideas of Untilted. What do you think? Do you think it's like, do you kind of remember listening to that, and do you feel like, I don't know, it's on its way to something else, or it's actually, because in a way we'll talk about this as well, but like this is one of the rare records we don't get an EP for. And so it's almost like the accompanying EP is Glasgow, and it's almost like a must listen to hear that other version of these tracks.
Yeah, I love Glasgow. Since we did that episode whenever ago, it's like a thing, I'll keep in storage on my phone and listen to. Like I come back to that more than Untilted itself. I think so.
All right. Well, those are the high level things. I think we can start jumping into the tracks now, and we'll start with track 1, which is called LCC. This is a popular one, so we got a bunch of listener emails to run through up front here. First, June says, LCC starts off the album with an uneasy metal resonating underneath, and then bam in your face with the most clicky drums and bam, bam, bam. You're shocked at first listen, but they go into a rhythm before introducing hi-hats and shifting the other elements around. You want to dance, there's an undeniable rhythm, and you're grooving. Then elements start shifting more and the beat starts collapsing, falling in and out of itself. It's trying to get itself together. What the fuck is going on? It's not stopping. And then it just brings you into this super casual, fun halftime beat. It's like a slower, more shuffly version of the first 4 minutes. Honestly, I like it less. I liked when the beat started having a seizure.
Sunil says, an excellent opener and an album highlight. The beginning section can come off a little obnoxious, especially that bap, bap, bap. However, the second main section is a major payoff to the first. Synths come in and the drum sounds recontextualize in a way that's really stunning.
Rob says, the opening drums on this can be pretty brutal if not in the mood. It's better over speakers though. There's room for the drums to dissipate and not crash straight into your skull. I love this tune once the drums settle and pace changes. You hear this technique a couple of times in the 2022 Dash shows. I can see why many people were quick to identify the connection to this album.
And Joe says, whenever I hear the middle part of the song, all I can think of now is GONKCAST MK2 theme song lounge remix. LCC is such a perfect opener for what comes next. I love how it sounds like it's going to be some kind of epic ambient build up at the beginning, but then it just bushwhacks you with some of the most aggressive mechanical sounds ever. I remember that Dan went on a rant 5 years ago about how much he hated this beat, and I can't remember ever disagreeing with him more than at that moment.
I can't believe you said that. Do you still feel that way?
I'm glad that Joe brought that up because, yeah, I think this is still my least favorite Autechre song. And maybe it's because I do most of my music listening just in my life in headphones. And one of the listeners said, like, that bap, 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 it just, like, really gets into your skull, especially when you have a sinus headache.
Very interesting. I mean, because I was honestly thinking, like, this to me is one of the very top tier Autechre songs. Like, if we ever did one of those, we probably should. Like, those kind of cheap content type things where they just make a tier list of like every Autechre song or something like that, right? Like, I would put this S tier easy. I think this is like a highlight of their entire discography. It is, it's because of that, like, kind of tense, frenetic, like, build up and just insanity that resolves itself so naturally into that second section that is so, like, pretty and dreamy even. There are numerous kind of like melodic layers that come in there, including this like kind of groovy low bass line and just kind of these interweaving like melodies and these swelling pads. I mean, it's just wonderful. It reminds me really of like, the knockout first track on Chiastic Slide, Sehtar, which also makes like a kind of hard transition into something, just stunning halfway through. I think it just, I don't know, I would put it like on kind of the Mount Rushmore of really phenomenally great Autechre tracks.
I would do the opposite, but I mean, I appreciate it, and I do think it is like good as an opener. I like that little trick of the like you put it on and it's just sort of ambient, or if you don't have it up very loud, it could seem like nothing's even happening, and it tricks you into turning up the volume too loud. And that's a pretty good move. I enjoy that. So one of the listeners in the Patreon sent in the chat like a video of someone playing this on an electronic drum set. And,
really? I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You should watch it. And that sort of gave me a little bit of an appreciation for it because the person's doing it and it's like an overhead shot of their pads, and so you can sort of see like, oh, what the pattern is. I guess I'm more of a visual learner, but it like sort of made it make a little more sense to me. But yeah, it's just like the listener that said earlier, like the album is sort of better in small doses. I tend to agree with that, but I think here LCC, like it works well when you listen to the whole record because I think it does like sort of foreshadow what you get into and stuff. But like as a track on its own, it's just sort of annoying. I just that sound of that snare, it's just like I don't know.
I'm just in shock at what I'm hearing. I mean, yeah, I just feel the complete opposite. I think like, one thing I love about this track, and actually they kind of do it again on Augmatic Disport, which does a similar kind of clack, clack, clack trick thing,
yeah,
which is like, but both tracks, they kind of do this like incredible, it's like a fluttering drum roll, it's like a series, it's almost like an impossible drum fill, like just a series of drums programmed so close together. And like, you kind of imagine like if a human had to play this, that's why I'd be so interested to see this video.
Yeah.
You imagine if a human had to play this, they would need like, 20 toms, and they would need to be able to go like at superhuman speed to kind of like roll through them. But the fact that it kind of like rolls at hyperspeed through all these different impossible drums and then resolves in like a clack, 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 it's just like, I just find that so amazing and like endlessly interesting. And then, yeah, it's that, it's that shift halfway through. Do you like the second half at least?
Yeah. I like it after the shift. It's really like I think the drum pattern and everything is very cool. I agree with all the stuff you say. It's mostly just like I hate the sound of that snare like so much. It's like one of my real autistic things is sounds of snares. If a snare sound bothers me, I can never get into the song, and that's basically what's happening here on this one. It's just because I think I know exactly what you mean in Augmatic Disport. It does like the exact same thing, and I think it sounds and works way better there. But I do appreciate, like I said, when you listen to the thing as a whole, it works better because, it's self-referential, and everything. Like it makes that moment in Disport, more impactful. But on its own, like if I was making a playlist, which I don't do, I'm an album guy, yeah. But I would never, this would never make my, Autechre Bangers playlist.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's funny because I wanted to test my own theory and see like how would the sequencing of this album be in a different order, but it feels like such sacrilege to me to even mess with it, like listen to it on shuffle. So
yeah. I think that this being up front is where it needs to be. It's perfect spot for it.
Well, okay, 3 more quick things I wanted to highlight about this track. One, love the, if you sort of notice, like when it gets into the sort of part 2 of the track, there is layered into that surprisingly pretty, like very light, toy-like synth melody that comes in. Kind of layered into that is like the buzziest as hell, kind of, it's like almost the same melody, but just played on the buzziest thing. And that, is one of those great examples of that kind of use of like DI buzz, where it just is so weird and uncanny sounding, in your head. I wanted to know the sort of trick that happens at the end of this track, which is it sort of shifts into right just for the end, like this little kind of like wubby, like bass groove, like sort of playing solo, and weirdly, there are a number of tracks on this record. Maybe this is part of that untilting that listener Joe was talking about, but like they kind of conclude with the bass groove. Like that's always like the last thing, And then there was one more thing. I promised 3 points I was going to make, and I'm looking at my notes. I can't find the third, but that's 2. Maybe we can jump right into iPatial section then, huh? I'll start with, this is track 2. Listener Sunil says, this is one of my all-time favorite Autechre tracks. It's totally unique sounding. All the tiny little bits of sound flying around make me think of a hard drive defragmenting or something. I love how even the pads are comprised of small sounds repeating.
Rob says, one of the highlights on this album, in my opinion, another very intense percussive opening gives way to snatches of melody that come and go. Again, this is very redolent of 2022 Dash.
Great vocab word.
Yeah, it is.
I don't even know how to pronounce that. All right, listener Joe says, iPatial section is an all-time favorite AE song for me and has from time to time been my straight-up favorite song by them overall. I've always thought that some of their most genius and memorable melodies are hidden in this song, but in some very unconventional ways using sounds that I can't even describe.
June goes on to say, iPatial section just immediately gives you this funky-ass groove with this weird, almost like a super high-pitched string playing a melody as the weirdest possible kick plays, and this percussive sound that sounds like muffled rocks being shaken in a box, low passed, and then just starts shifting again. Oh, yes, I love this. I also love those dubby snares that start coming out, plate reverb to high heavens.
Yeah, so this track, iPatial section, I find this like a little bit more knock your head off at the beginning. So do you find this one annoying?
No, see, this one, I don't know if it's like just from the order or whatnot, but I think this one, I love this song. It comes out the gate in like such a nice way. In fact, it was like listening to it, like I got to like, when you're towards the end of LCC, be like, oh, here comes that like straight out at you, percussion thing. And I really like it. I think it's like more of, I like the drum sounds in this one. Like just the LCC, my big beef is just that sound of that snare. It's just like the worst sounding snare I've ever heard in my life.
That's so funny. Yeah. I mean, I think like, this one I think comes out the gate. It is like, it's almost like a bunch of sounds like kind of bouncing
Very
around,
bouncy.
and it just sounds very tightly wound again. But I love like this sort of addition of these kind of plinky, like, high spidery type sounds that it's like, bouncing at all levels of the audio spectrum. And there is a lot of use in this track, which I think that was the last thing I wanted to mention about LCC before we moved on. Of another thing that I think is kind of a trademark of this record is a lot of that like kind of feedback and squeaking, off of certain sounds. Like, but again, it sounds so uncanny and like DI and unrealistic. There's also a lot of like digital, distortion, like a lot of crunch on this record, and it just sounds so uncanny. I feel like this is almost the best example of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I found it hard to like describe the sounds on this record because like some of them are so uncanny that it's. I mean, like the listener said, like muffled box of rocks. It's like you have to resort to really out there sort of things. I feel like in that first part of the song, like it just feels like everything is like sort of trapped, like trying to get out and stuff, which is a feeling I think I felt a lot during 2022 Dash. So maybe we're getting a little bit of that here, but it's just such an interesting thing that this, at least the beginning, like it's not something I would think was done by hand. I said at the start, right. This one, it feels like that percussion, feels like, maybe algorithmic or whatnot. But, once we get to like that second part with that like little tick-tock, digital beep thing coming, like then, starts to make a little more sense to me, I think. But, this one's pretty great. I really like it.
Yeah, and that is such a stunning transition that occurs on this track as well, which is like, because everything's like bouncing. I like how you described it as like stuck or trapped or something. I'm sometimes addicted to watching these like videos on, TikTok that are like, I don't know, it'll be like a bouncing ball, and every time it goes in, it like, I don't know, I can't even describe it actually, but it's like you're watching a bouncing ball and there's like a little opening and you're like just watching like for when it's finally going to go in there. And then when it goes in there, it's like bouncing, like ricocheting like crazy or something like that. I mean, it's just got that kind of quality, like ricocheting, bouncing all around the place, like a small space. And it eventually starts like stuttering and skipping and stalling. And that is another kind of MO of this record. But then what's so brilliant about it is like the way it basically hits like a full stall. It's just whirring, like stuck. And that becomes the foundation of this outro part, which is like surprisingly pretty. It almost has like kind of a glitchy, like oval quality or something. The way this like stalling, skipping sound becomes so melodic.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that, but yeah, this is like pretty oval sound, even maybe even just the whole record. But yeah, I this whole record does that good trick of like taking something that's like pretty crazy and out there and ending up in a pretty like melodic, pretty sort of place. It really does that, which I think 2022 Dash does that somewhat too. We kept talking about like that heaven section and everything.
Yeah, and then what happens again? But we resolve in like this little bass groove. Like that's the last thing that we're left on. So, I mean, it is kind of striking, right? And weird that LCC and iPatial section are like the exact same structurally, like what, isn't that kind of weird? Like to do it back to back like that? Yeah.
I mean, does it like, do you think it makes the record, like a little samey or less good formulaic, or does it not bother you?
I literally can't decide. Like I just
that's why I asked you.
I know. I don't know. It's like I absolutely love this record, but I think I feel that it is sequenced awkwardly. I mean, like the track sequencing. I think it is awkward. I don't know what I would change. And in fact, I feel like I've listened to it so much that I'm like really married to the structure, but I feel like it could have been better, maybe.
Yeah, I think I agree too. I mean, like I said, I think I'm so married to the structure too. Like I said, like LCC. I don't know if it was just me wanting to get out of there or something, but like I was always like anticipating that the start of iPatial there. So yeah, I don't know. It does like again. I think when I was looking at the whole record and I wasn't really noticing that. But then when you break it down and you see like, oh yeah, they tend to, end in the space groove and in this sort of order and stuff, like it kind of becomes more apparent. And, it's like seeing the flaws, but also with maybe it's not seeing the forest for the trees or whatever, like listener said.
Yeah. I mean, and also, I guess you could say this maybe about any record, but if you're just listening to it and not looking at the, track list or anything like that, for all it's like those little 3 short tracks could be like one multi-series. You know what I mean? It's like not necessarily like so
it's
obvious.
not apparent.
Yeah. Anyway, we can move forward to track 3, which is Pro Radii. One of my memories of recording this episode the first time is that I didn't know how to pronounce that, and then I just got roasted in the comments because it's like a sound that all math nerds know, but I don't know, so everybody was making fun of me for not knowing radii, plural for radius, radiuses. I did want to note up front here, AE pages, which, you should always check out. They have great, little information and even trivia and stuff. They note that the start of Pro Radii was done by Rob using his MPC for the beats, and the end was done by Sean, yielding a 50-50 split in contributions. Now that is very interesting, right? Like that's rare insight into who did what, which we almost never get. But to kind of put our listeners' comments out on the table here, listener Rob says, it's quite disarming to hear something so club-friendly on an AE album, but this is pretty close. Snatches of samples and voices all contribute to this clubby banger. It's probably the most mainstream track on the whole album. I don't know, Rob, what you might be smoking to have thought that, but I guess I get what you're saying. We'll talk about it.
June says Pro Radii is massive. These crazy marching drums just playing all around you, and these weird crowd samples over these weird synths that break that stabs in random before giving this crazy funky drum beat as the reverb almost glitches and morphs around. Then it just goes into this other crazy drum rhythm with some super resonant, very weird strings play on top. Wait, has it changed again? These fellas never get boring. It feels like everything carries the same DNA the entire time. Then the song starts bringing back that initial section to wrap things up. Yes.
And listener Sunil says, another huge highlight, this track keeps morphing and it stays captivating and awesome somehow. It almost feels like they're showing off. So indeed, I mean, to give, credit where it's due, right? We were saying that the first 2 tracks follow the exact same structure. This one seems to, and yet it adds the additional wrinkle of bringing back, I mean, I think in a very elegant, like effortless way, the start of the track for the ending, which kind of puts like a wonderful bow on this whole thing. It's really interestingly composed in that sense. But yeah, just having a bit of fun with Rob here, because to me, I find this track insanely weird. I love it, but I would not describe it as like a clubby banger or mainstream in any way personally.
I think I get what he's getting at. I mean, it does like some of the hallmarks of those kind of things, like that sample and stuff. But yeah, I mean, whatever club you're going to that's playing this kind of stuff, let me know. But I this is another one I really love. This is one that like weirdly has like a lot of reverb at the front, like that first like
it sounds kind of very synthetic. You know what I mean? Like very artificial, like on purpose.
Exactly. Like that first like little drum hit. It like, because we've been so bone dry the rest of the record, and now we're like immediately in this like very synthetic, like very weird wetness. Yeah,
like these tumbling, super boomy low end drums, like covered in reverb, but like a very weirdly kind of fake. You imagine it's like right on the synth, right on the hardware or whatever. I'm not like an expert on these things, but it just has this kind of like cheapness to it, and it's really, it's like kind of folded into these little snippets of like a crowd. Sometimes you could just hear that kind of intangible, like, just the sound of a bunch of people like kind of stirring a little bit, but then it'll erupt in like a shout or applause, or weirdly the word break. It's like the strangest little collage there. And what happens is that the sort of shift in this track is that it kind of breaks down into I don't know, it sounds almost like a jazzy, like simple drum kit doing this little kind of pitter patter, like build up. You know what I mean? It almost is like a long bridge or something, sort of lightly, takes us through. There's some weird glitchy clicks added and little taps and a little bit of like wubbing bass kind of comes in, but it just feels like we're lightly building up. There's actually like quite a pretty little 4-chord pattern comes in. Again, it's like very light. And then it's like the payoff is that those massive bass booms start to kind of, thud back in and tie it all together, like I said. But it's, isn't it weird? Like that the whole central part of this track is like a long jazzy bridge. That's not the direction I would expect when I first heard the beginning of this track at all. No,
it kind of like this might be my favorite on the record, and I think like things like that, like I love that such weird reverb thing, and then that we've kind of fallen into this formula that we just were talking about, but this one like subverts from that. The crowd noise sample thing, it's like it's like half the time you feel like you're questioning, like, is that a sample? Is it just like some weird noise, whatever. And then I think like the break, like really like kind of clues you in, whatnot. I don't know. This one's just like super interesting. There's just so much happening and whatnot.
And nothing like it. I mean, there's never been a song like this ever.
No, exactly.
And in fact, that's what I was saying up front, is like Untilted is such a unique record, even in Autechre's discography, that there is just nothing else that sounds like this. Now, so this means that we can confirm that the big booming like insanity and the sort of chopped up crowd noise and stuff was done by Rob, and that I'm guessing the sort of pitter patter like jazzy kind of build up with the pretty parts through the middle was done by Sean. Is there anything to be learned by knowing how that splits up?
I don't think so.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Shelve that for later. I feel like maybe that could become useful information if we ever.
It's the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, it might be the Rosetta Stone to this whole thing. Interesting that the pretty part of this track is done by Sean. Maybe there's something there. I don't know. But we'll keep moving on to track 4, which is Augmatic Disport. Now, AE Pages has another amusing note for this one, which I've seen posted many a time on the AE Reddit. But most song lyric database websites have incorrect lyrics for Augmatic Disport. They read, "Whoa, oh, oh, this disport is so augmatic. It is like a kind of magic, and baby, when you dance, I can see a bowl of crisps in your eyes. What the hell is going on?
Is it just like when you upload songs to like streaming services and stuff, you can like add the lyrics? Is it like something they did as a joke, or did somebody else do it? And it's because I know all those sites, they just crawl that metadata from databases,
and it's like
stuff.
Once somebody entered this, it's now never going to.
Oh yeah, you'll never get rid of it because they never recrawl.
Yeah. I don't know. It's so weird. But here's some listeners on this track. Listener Sunil says, I like to imagine Augmatic Disport as a flashy but abstract drumming exhibition. There's this wild pattern of impossibly fast drum rolls moving around the kit. The pattern deconstructs as empty space keeps getting added. Then there's these mesmerizing, dreamy synths, and a drum groove sneaks its way in. It's a mind bender.
Joe says Augmatic Disport sounds like they finally decided to just go apeshit and make the hip-hop track they've been holding off on for nearly 20 years, but it's so thick and heavy that the sound waves literally can't fit inside the stereo tracks they're being recorded onto, and they're blowing the DAW wide open from inside. This is one where I imagine being at some illegal raid in an abandoned London subway station.
Rob says, for me, the almost blown out sub bass that sees out this track is what makes it such a favorite. It's so funky.
And June says, yes, yeah, this Disport is pretty augmatic, all right. I like the nice little beat at the end. It's a really funny juxtaposition of all the shattering drums earlier in the song.
Yeah, so indeed, we kind of are back at, what is honestly the best version of that kind of pattern of like ending the track on an inexplicable bass groove. And it's kind of like the best part of this whole track, the way this very, deep, like kind of 808 sounding like sub is just suddenly grooving with like kind of light brushes, but very, very hip hop. I mean, this sound, we haven't talked enough about it, but like this part, and then also a number of sections on all the previous tracks, especially just the kind of hardware sound of the drums, it just like screams hip hop. But here is like where they really fully just do it. Before we get there, though, of course, is what we talked about earlier, which is this insane, and actually I think it was Sunil put it really nicely, this just like insane, impossibly fast drum roll moving around the kit, right? Like concluding in a clack, clack, clack that for some reason you like better, Dan.
The reason being that this snare sounds nicer. No, I really do like the percussion here. Like it like really just like pummels you right out of the gate. And then and the whole time during that, like I really noticed this in headphones. Like there's like some non-percussive like things that seem like they're trying to like break out, but just can't get past that loud crunchy drum thing. And then finally when it sinks down into just that bass groove at the end, like I think right there it's showing you like people's complaints of Autechre's like feel so inhuman or like random and whatnot. Like that's like showing you the bones of the thing, and it's like this is just a hip hop track, essentially that we've like gone nuts over top. It's like a little peek behind the curtain. I feel like.
I like that. Yeah, I like putting it that way because I do think that a lot of times they are trying to show us that like that's at the core of what they do. And here's maybe like the best moment of that. And of course that might be a feature of set B of 2022 Dash, which is like to kind of take us behind the curtain and actually a lot of parts I think of I kept sort of half jokingly half seriously saying that 2022 Dash sounds like the history of electronic music or something, but I just think there are a number of parts where they're kind of showing us their influences, like just bare exposing them and then Autechrizing them to kind of like show us what they do, and we see that here, right?
Yeah, totally. And I love that trick. It's like the pleb complaint of all modern art. Like it's not pretty or it's built on something else or something, and like to show like no, it's built upon this foundation and stuff. I think is like really useful and like a mastery of the craft. Yeah.
So I kind of think of this record, I am absolutely mesmerized by the beginning of this track. I kind of think of it as like the logical conclusion of drill and bass. Like if you listen to the first track on Aphex Twin's Richard D. James album 4, with like those kind of stunning drum rolls, like impossible drum rolls, go to that as like a double feature and then go immediately to this track. You'll hear that it's like, this is literally as far as you can take that same idea, and I just love that. I love how as the track goes on, it's almost like that those impossible drum rolls keep getting more and more tightly wound until they start to almost just become like buzzy static or something. Like this track almost starts to disintegrate or, untilt, as listener Joe would say, right? As it goes through, and it basically like fully stalls out in a way. Until we get sort of creeping in from the like way deep beneath these kind of, I don't know, Philip Glass-esque like, synthetic string melodies or something, like kind of slowly building. Again, just something surprisingly pretty. It really reminds me of, I think this is one of those little hints at where they would go next, but it reminds me of the ambient tracks on Chorustis, which are like such a highlight for some people. You hear that kind of coming up from the depths of this track and sort of coming in to focus. Eventually those kind of totally twisted beats reemerge in like these kind of digital splashes or something, and that's what leads us into just maybe the fattest bass groove in Autechre history. I also wanted to note the comp of like that kind of use of that interesting kind of just fat 808 kind of groove. It really reminds me of, there's a similar quality to 3SC from set D of 2022 Dash. And I would also say that LSEB from set A of 2022 Dash uses that same kind of thing that I think is, again, just one of those touchstones. The last thing I wanted to kind of throw at you, though, is when this track gets more and more twisted, I really start thinking, this is one of those moments where I'm like, this is very of a piece with Confield. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that. You said it at the beginning, like, this does sort of feel in a bit of the world of Confield. It's not as like divorced as I think we once thought it was.
Yeah, I used to really think of it as like a kind of a total turn away from that, but now I kind of recognize it as like coming from that same era.
I think with the benefit of seeing where they end up and all, I think it makes sense to see that now.
Yeah. All right. We'll move on to track 5. And like, I think unquestionably what we would call kind of the second half of this record, like after those 4 juggernauts in a row, we move into these shorter tracks. The first is Iera. Our listener Rob said, clicky rapid fire percussion intro is also another one that I might prefer over speakers. The synth tones strangely put me in the mind of RDJ, but I can't explain why. This might be my least favorite track on the album. It's kind of chaotic and has elements of sinister synths, but it doesn't really do anything for me. It threatens to introduce a steady drum beat, but this is never fully achieved and is a bit of a tease.
Joe says Iera holds Augmatic Disport's beer on the hip-hop front. Was he the same person that made that same...
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say we're getting a lot of that. It literally sounds like some crazy underground rapper could just freestyle directly over this, and it would be totally incredible.
Listener Sunil says, it starts full throttle, but the energy gradually deflates and it mellows out a lot. I love the more low-key beats that it shifts into. Don't sleep on this one. It's really good. So even the fact that Sunil feels like he has to say, don't sleep on this one, I think, betrays the fact that it can't help but feel a little slight coming after those 4 monsters that start the record. But what do you think of this one?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's a good track, but it does sort of feel like, and maybe it's because of its position, it does feel like, okay, this is one of the lesser, we're in the middle of the record, kind of tracks here. I really like that, like, clicky rapid fire thing right at the front. I think I agree with Rob, too. Like, I hear a little RDJ in the synths and stuff. This one's sort of like, it feels like the middle of the record,
Yeah, I wrote down that this track kind of makes me think of like an evil version of that Aphex track Flim from the Come to Daddy EP, which I guess must be like one of his most popular tracks at this point. I think it's a TikTok hit, but it's one of the prettiest of all of his songs, and it's got this kind of jazzy like drum filling and soloing over the top of these really pretty keyboards. This is like, more like bouncy kind of like a distracted frenetic version of that kind of drum filling and soloing, still kind of low key. And then instead of those pretty keyboard sounds, we get this kind of low, like detuned kind of organ sound, like this low wobble. It honestly reminds me of, because we just talked about the track Home Computer from Computer World by Kraftwerk. It also makes use of like kind of a detuned synth, and it kind of has like this low warble to it that's really just ringing out. I mean, this track kind of does a similar thing. The beat, I think it's just awesome. It's got these extremely tight snare fills, and my favorite part is like hisses that sound like spray paint, cans or something. Somebody said that, it was Joe said that he could imagine like an underground rapper over this. It has this kind of like cool, I don't know, like the streets of the Blade Runner city, some rapper who lives there kind of a sound. I do think it's underrated just by virtue of what it's getting overshadowed by. But to me, it's a great track. Yeah,
I alluded to it being overshadowed and stuff. And like I said, too, in listening to this record, like in more bits and pieces, I think, I don't know, this is a record, I think like a lot of the tracks like stand out on their own, like outside of the record. And this is one that I think does because of, not getting overshadowed. This one, again, it has like a little bit of a more strange reverb like on the drums at points, making this one, any of the ones that have like the reverb are kind of better on headphones. I feel like, But also, I like this one. When it switches and those new sounds come in, they like really sound like they're from Super Mario or something, like they're real, like kind of video gamey.
Yeah, actually, kind of contradicting my theory here, which is that we now have entered this section of like tracks that are a little bit more steady and don't change. This one actually right at the end does have a little shift, and it enters this new kind of like the beat just kind of takes on this new shape where it's doing actually kind of we talked about this on I think the set something, I can't remember which part, but something on set D of the 2022 Dash thing, as well as of course that famous track on LP5, but where the beat is kind of slowing down and speeding up kind of before your very eyes. It kind of does this really cool thing like that. But yeah, there's a little transformation right at the end there. I'm kind of thinking like, I don't know. This track could have been the single. You know what I mean? It's got that kind of quality. It's like a straight shot that kind of shows you what's cool about this record in miniature. But we'll move on to track 6, which is called Fermium. Again, we'll get some listeners on the table. Rob says, I love the start to this track. It puts me in mind of Tri-Rep. This is almost a throwback to 90s AE. I really like this tune as it takes me back to earlier Autechre, but then finishes as a great percussive track. But again, it's the synths that come in toward the end that put me in mind of the 2022 Dash shows.
Joe says the breakdown of Fermium sounds so similar to the breakdown of Sem that I wonder if it wasn't the starting point and they hadn't been messing around with it live and came up with another great idea and just reused it in an incredible way. That seems to have been the process with much of NTS sessions, and I wonder if we're not witnessing the very start of their new methodology here.
Listener Sunil says, this is the only track on Untilted that I'm not in love with. It's pretty cool, but the sounds are too caustic for my taste without enough payoff, and it lacks the depth of the other tracks. I think that I do love this one because I love everything about this record, but I do think that this is probably my least favorite track on the record. It is the least evolving of all the tracks. It pretty much starts in, as it's going to finish. And yeah, it does have this kind of throwback quality. Like Rob was saying, I kind of wrote down on my notes, like this sounds like an outtake from Chiastic Slide or something. It's got this kind of 90s AE, like kind of glitchiness, this like slightly distorted like bleeping, and this kind of like chill, like pitter patter quality. Actually, this track and the next track, I've been on a little kick the last couple of days of listening to Throbbing Gristle a little bit.
Nice.
And it's got that kind of a feel of like, in another dimension, this would be like the demo beat on your Casio keyboard, and then it just is, they just have turned it on and it's riding steady, and then they're like playing with static and feedback and, squeaking and squealing and stuff like that over the top. Really kind of reminds me of some of that like slightly industrial Throbbing Gristle type vibes. And I know that they're huge fans of like Coil, which is obviously connected there. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little inspiration there.
Yeah, I see that. I mean, I like this one. It's again, it's not like the top, we're in the middle of the record and it feels like it, it's like really looping. But I do like towards the end, like it does break down a bit, and gets like a little droney. And then like during that drone, it's like little pieces from the old, beat, like kind of break through here and there. It's like, it's a real, like disintegration loops, sort of trick almost,
I wrote down the same thing. Like these little bleeps are like trying to like reemerge from this kind of staticky feedback, but they can't, and it's also, there's toward the end, you kind of get this like repeating like bum, 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 bum. And you kind of hear that kind of trying to break through a little bit. So yeah, I don't know. It's a cool track, but it has this kind of, like forgotten quality. And then we move on to track 7, which is called The Trees. According to AE Pages, when asked about the origin of the noises at the end of The Trees, Rob responded with, "Those noises are made from the trees." It's the most like Twin Peaks shit I've ever heard. So to get the listeners on the table, listener Sunil says, another good track that you shouldn't sleep on, mellow by Untilted standards. There are nice beats as usual and some interesting background ambience going on here.
Rob says, glitchy, chaotic, energetic. Again, this might be better suited to speakers rather than headphones, as there is a wooden-sounding percussive tone that can aggravate my head in the intro. I like how the track seems to collapse on itself and reduce to a solo drum pattern before building again. The scattershot drums are joined by moody, haunting tones in the background. It's very creepy and reminds me of some points in the Dublin show that I recently listened to.
And listener Joe says, I've never known what to think about the trees and have long dismissed it as one of their most quixotic tracks. You guys are killing it with the vocab words.
Yeah, I know, man.
But since fully embracing Chorustus as a masterpiece, I've come to understand and appreciate it more and more to the point that I now just unqualifiedly love it. The suite of Iera Through the Trees sounds almost like a rough draft of Chorustus. Short tracks are teeming with interesting ideas that could go on for much longer and be extended the way that the first 4 tracks and the Chorustus version tracks are, but instead settle for a highly condensed and concise take. So what do you think of this one, The Trees?
Well, first off, to answer or respond to Joe, I agree. You know, like that really shows like how this is like manually programmed. I think, you know, like it, and I could see like why they went the jammy direction, because like songs like this one here in particular, like feel like, yeah, you could like, you know, jam on them for quite a while, whatnot, you know, morph. Whereas like they've taken the, you know, opposite approach here, and we you know, we just get that like condensed, concise you know, version of it. I like this song. It's like sort of like a false end of the record, you know, like it feels like we're sort of ending, you know, it's like kind of creepy. We've got this the end of the track, you know, itself, like whatever Rob called The Trees, you know, like real like sort of moody, like, you know, outro-ish, but you know, then trick you. We've still got 16 minutes of a sublimit coming up right behind you.
Yeah, I mean, this is, like I said, another one that is kind of reminding me of Throbbing Gristle in the way it's just like this kind of steady, like light wubby beat. Again, sounds like in another dimension it would be like a demo beat on a Casio, an old Casio or something. Mm-hmm. And what's kind of riding us through the beginning is this kind of acid, like buzzy riff. Reminds me a little of Richard D. James, honestly. And that eventually becomes more of just like, you know, it starts sputtering and stuttering as so many sounds on this record do. And then it sort of turns into just like static. And the whole conclusion of this track is like sort of the beat is just devolving into like steady beeping. And we have like a static solo, like over the top. Honestly, kind of reminds me of that funny track on Plus, Marhide. It's just like the whole quote unquote chorus is just like increasing layers of static, you know, of hiss, like tape hiss or something. It's just kind of interesting in that, like, I don't know, Throbbing Gristle experimental way. And eventually it just becomes static and feedback for a solid 1.5 minutes at the end. And, you know, the quality, like you said, a false outro, I really like putting it that way, because it's like, because like I said, this record is it's recorded so closely. It's using so much DI. I mean, that static doesn't sound real. It sounds like your speaker is actually broken. And it sort of has this fun quality of like, okay, having put it through the ringer of Untilted, now my goddamn speaker is broken. You know, it has that kind of quality.
Yeah, totally. It's the kind of thing like it sounds that static, like it would be perfect, like ending in like, you know, an endless groove, you know, sort of thing on a record itself. I mean, is this like a little bit of a problem with the sequencing that we still have sublimit to go? You know, do you think that those two tracks should be switched or anything?
I mean, it's an interesting thought. It seems almost like heresy to say that sublimit shouldn't be the grand conclusion here, but I wonder if it would work. But, you know, let's talk about it. Let's dive into sublimit. Track 8, our last track here. AE Pages has a couple notes again. They say, the track samples Sparky D and the Playgirls' The Battle. And also, at almost 16 minutes in length, Sublimit was the longest song Autechre had released at that point. Drain 2 off LP5 technically surpassed it at over 21 minutes long, but only 9 minutes of that runtime is the actual song. Sublimit was eventually beaten by Perlin's Subrange 636 off the Chorustus Quadrange EP, which is nearly an hour long in itself. So the listeners On this one, listener June says, I think Sublimate is the standout track on this album. 15 minutes of some of the best percussion. I just love how this develops and shifts. It really feels like a test of a live set, very much a jam.
Sunil says, an epic closer. The first half changes frequently and rapidly, a bit like Pro Radii. The latter half is long and drawn out, which works well as the outro to the album.
Joe says, I don't know what else can be said about Sublimate that hasn't already been said, but in case no one else has pointed this out, I think that this sounds a lot like RDJ's most frenetic work. It's funny he keeps coming up this episode. It's interesting that this came out the same year as the Analord series. Guys, please do it on a bonus episode series, since this at times almost sounds like something that could be released on the Analords. I think for the first time since probably 1993, RDJ and AE were inspired in a very similar way and were doing similar things, pushing their gear to the absolute limit and having a ton of fun doing it.
And Rob says, in these post-NTS times we live in, a 20-minute track is fairly standard from Autechre. In 2005, however, this must have been a wild statement of intent, chock full of ideas, tunes, beats, and melodies come and go, which we'll hear again in the 2022 Dash sets. You guys originally likened AE to toddlers who were excited to share all their ideas at once. Do you still think that? I think this technique of theirs is based on DJs teasing the crowd with upcoming or potential changes in tracks. It's a masterpiece in delayed or even denied gratification.
Yeah, so I mean, interesting comment by Rob. Actually, I think it was Joe had also made some comment that I didn't include here about our previous discussion of this record, and saying that we were kind of thinking of it as like a breakthrough for Autechre. I think because we were a little bit down on Draft, which felt like, running out of steam a little bit, and then it's just exciting to hear them overflowing with ideas. And it's funny because, I think our first bonus episode we did on this sort of return of the podcast was Richard D. James' The Tuss Project. We talked about his Rush Up Edge album. And, Joe here has just compared, that like this song in particular to the Analord series, which is kind of from the same exact era when RDJ was rediscovering hardware. It's just so funny that we were talking about the Tuss. We were saying we actually thought, we're like, what if Autechre did this, kind of went back to limited themselves to vintage gear or something. And this isn't exactly that, but it's weird because it kind of is, right? And this track in particular, Sublimate, it sounds like the most hardware of this whole record and sounds the most like pushing, physical machines that are almost not capable of keeping up with it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why do you think both of these artists did this at almost the same time? Is it just in 2005, the computer seemed like it was going to be this great, replacing everything, and then maybe they're seeing a bit of a flaws with it, obviously computing power wasn't as high as it is now. I don't know that they could do everything they do in Macs that they do now. You think that's it? They were maybe dissatisfied with it, or dissatisfied with the process of Draft?
Man, I'm so curious because I honestly feel like, in kind of reading some of the press around Confield, like I was saying earlier, I think they sound like they're on the defensive a little bit. When people learned about that they were using algorithmically generated stuff in Macs, it's as if they were being accused of, just generating random noise, which
cheating.
I think cheating. To an uninitiated listener, I think Confield can sound a little bit like that, maybe. And I just wonder if there was a little bit of a bounce back going on in general from these artists. It's interesting because listener Rob, and I put this at the end, but I'll just kind of bring it up now. He had asked this interesting question about how weird 2005 is. And he kind of framed it like this: I have been mulling over why AE would go back to this era of music for their most recent live shows, and I have some hot takes. One, a feeling that the album was unfairly overlooked in 2005 as musical tastes had moved on from established 90s acts such as AE, Aphex, and Boards of Canada. Maybe Sean and Rob felt the time was ripe for these types of tunes again. I'll save the other comments for a little bit later, but it's he also mentioned, Daft Punk's Human After All, or whatever that's called, flopped at the same time. Mm-hmm. Doesn't it feel like some of the 90s artists started struggling around this time, and I just wonder if there was like a little bit of a back to basics thing going on.
Yeah, it sort of feels a little bit like, the kind of the opposite of like how the 80s went, like in the 80s, like all your classic rockers like just could not hack it, like not all of them like, devolve into like some varying forms of being embarrassing, and it was like because general culture had like moved on to like, the synthesizer and computer and digital and stuff. And like, I think like, maybe looking back at it, like the mid 2000s or, early 2000s, is kind of the opposite, like they were sort of like maybe looking for, quote unquote, real instruments again and whatnot, Yeah.
And I think also what happened is that, the world of electronic music started to, thanks in part to the kind of IDM artists of the 90s, it started to fully merge with like the quote unquote rock and pop world.
Yeah, like
around
MGMT and stuff.
MGMT or like, LCD Sound System. That was one Rob mentioned as well. It just like stopped being a meaningful distinction. And I think that kind of left some of these quote unquote purely electronic artists, a little bit overlooked
dust
at this time or something. And so I don't know. I just wonder if they kind of like, if there was an overall going back to the drawing board a little bit. And it does seem to me like maybe Untilted was, I don't know, kind of overlooked in a lot of ways. And that it's now, I think it's still a little divisive, but it's now that it's, it's a little bit more becoming more celebrated. But yeah, to get back to Sublimate, that's honestly something we could do like a whole episode about, I think. But to get back to Sublimate in particular, you mentioned, does this work as the ending? It sounds almost like a preposterous question. Does this work as the ending of the record? I love the way after that kind of fake out ending of the trees, it just slams in with kind of a return to the first half of this album's like frenetic, super tight hardware drums, a lot of really clacky, snares. And that kick is like kind of rifling, it's like it makes me think of, I don't know, this is a weird comp, but I always remember when I was a kid, I saw Terminator 2 on TV. And I remember that the volume of the gunfire was like scaring me. You know what I mean? It seemed so violent with how loud and like booming it was, and the like sort of rifling kick on this track, it kind of has that same effect where it's like making me jump, a little bit.
yeah, I can see that. I think I do like it as the outro. It's a good like wrap up, where we've been on this record. I think it really like ties the whole thing together, makes it cohesive. I think it was Joe that said, is this almost even a like a concept album type thing? And I think this track has a lot to do with that. I'm the one who brought it up, but I think I do kind of like the fake out of the previous track. Like you sort of seem like you're done, and then just kidding, we're 16 more minutes of back where we were kind of thing. I think it works pretty well, especially since at the time they had never done this long thing. I think that's something, looking at Autechre now, we really take for granted. Like,
that's a good point.
Ending in a long track is like just sort of what happens now. But that would have been a bit stranger in 2005. It's kind of crazy to think like this is like the middle of their career, right? It feels like sort of late or whatnot, but 20 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know. This track, I think, is really weird. People talk about it like it's this obvious masterpiece, like it's this absolute banger. And I think that they are just remembering the first like 5 minutes of the track because it goes in the strangest direction. And honestly, it's fitting for an album that I think is, also organized in the weirdest possible way. Because after this absolutely thrilling like rush of a, abstract version of 80s hip hop kind of intro, it sort of shifts into like we actually get like it starts stuttering and sputtering and stalling out like a lot of tracks here do, which allows this kind of new like beat to start creeping in. It's got more of like a lighter pitter patter, reminds me a little bit more of like the second half of this album, like in its kind of mellowness. And you get this weird kind of like scratching sound. I wonder if this is the sampled quality, because it sounds like a horn blast or something, like getting scratched. And it sort of like stalls out, hits a hard stop, and then we just entered this weird nebulous space where it's like, it honestly sounds like if I tried to scratch, like how I would screw up the whole thing. You know what I mean? I would kill the whole vibe because it would like fall apart and not work. It sounds like that for several minutes. And then we get that pitter patter starts to kind of slowly build back up, but it actually never arrives. And I kind of think of like the 10 straight minutes of the end of this song as like, it's a come down disguised as a buildup. Like you think it's kind of going somewhere, but there's something about the, you know, like Rob said, denied gratification. It just peters out. But isn't that weird as hell?
Yeah. I like, you know, what you said there. Yeah, it really like subverts your expectation, you know, like you really do feel like it's building up, but it's doing the opposite. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I just find it so funny that people they talk about it like it's this banger. The first 5 minutes are a banger. The second half is like the weirdest, falling apart, like trying to stand back up and just basically not succeeding. And in that respect, it reminds me a little bit of Set A of 2022 Dash, which, like we talked about, has this kind of like, it's like the pieces assemble, they come together, and then it falls back apart. You know, it's got that kind of like, denied gratification. I like that. So, with that, we have reached the end of the record. I believe this is the shortest track list. You know, it's not the shortest record, but 8 tracks is the shortest tracks of any Autechre record. I wanted to throw in a little bonus trivia before we kind of return and start to wrap up with our high-level thoughts again. A recent Ask Autechre Anything, they were asked about the Japanese bonus track on this album called Zurich 2001, which is one of the strangest of Japanese bonus tracks. We did a whole episode on the first run of this podcast ranking all of the Japanese bonus tracks. And if I remember correctly, this was like the lowest because it's the weirdest. It's not even 2 minutes of just basically like shrieking feedback or something. When asked about it, Sean said, and it's not even from the right year, you know what I mean? It's from like several years before. Sean said, I don't know if I recall correctly, as usual with the Japan extras, we just forgot and had to find something and had that lying around. And Rob said, it was a good display of how well it can kick off in Europe at an electronic gig. The situation was full on intense because they were really pushing us and we fully pushed back. Now, I don't know what that means if it's like an example of them really trying to challenge the audience, if this was how they started the set. How do you interpret that?
I took it to mean like it's the build up or something, but yeah, I don't fully get it. I think Sean's answer seems to make a little bit more sense in what probably happened.
Yeah. Now here's another interesting trivia fact about this record. This according to AE Pages. Around the time of the BFH MP3 leak for Untilted, a fake version of the record started circulating on file sharing services. The fake was created by Robert Martin of record label record.org, using material from his album Lying on the Floor, Mingling with God in a Tijuana motel room next door to a veterinary supply store. Under the pseudonym of Fluorescent Gray, Robert argued that his previous successful hoax of a fake Iraq beheading was part of the motivating factor for this. That version became so widespread that in an interview with In the Mix, Sean confirmed that it was a fake, mentioning that the more fakes the merrier, we've released fakes ourselves, but not this time. He also lamented over how Robert's, quote, sense of priority is clearly fucked. Another thing, I have no idea what to even do with this information.
Yeah, I know. I like that. It's like, well, first I'll fake a beheading and then the new Autechre record.
Next step, Autechre.
It's just like,
what the hell?
It's the most like 2005 thing, though. You know, like you got the Iraq War.
Hey, you know what's funny, by the way, is I was looking back. The first Untilted episode we did, we released it, apparently, if it's right, on January 8th, 2001. So that means 2 days after the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol, that's what we were doing. Like, we were celebrating the start of the end of U.S. democracy by just talking about Untilted. How funny.
Nice. Well, at least everything turned out all right.
That's right. All right. Well, now that we are at the end here, has anything, changed in your your overall impressions now that we've, broken it all down, or I guess more directly, like just now that we've spent a good deal revisiting it after all this time. And do you have any kind of new clarity on this record's overall relationship with the stuff that came after, especially 2022 Dash?
I mean, I think I definitely see, connections in the drums to 2022 Dash, which I, didn't see before, re-listening to this. I don't think I've listened to Untilted since we had, started getting into those AE 2022s and everything. I think my overall impressions about the same as it always has been. It's not like the record I grab when I'm gonna listen to a random Autechre. But I do enjoy it. I think it's great. It's one of the records I think that like maybe I like the idea of more of like straight listening to it, and I think that has a lot to do with the dryness of it and the fact that it's like not so headphone friendly. Like I said, I just naturally do most of my listening in headphones, so if it doesn't work there, it just kind of precludes things a bit. But I was really glad to check in with it because I haven't really gone to it in a while, and especially like I'm glad we started with it because I've always like thought of this record like in context of the other things, in which we did that a bit here, but like starting out this one forced me to like look at it from a different way, I think.
Yeah, gives it a fair shot, like stand on its own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I always loved this record. I still love it. I might even love it even more, and I think that might honestly be because I spent so much more time this week listening to it on speaker than I did on headphones. And yeah, back when we were first doing this podcast, I did a lot more headphone listening. I was listening to living in a little apartment, but now I can kind of play it loud, and that really works well for this record in particular. As far as like the connections to 2022 Dash, I think I still feel like I said at the start here, which is like there are a lot of little connections, and we tried to point those out, right? But overall, I just think the approach here is quite different from the approach on 2022 Dash, and it is almost more interesting as like another way, another route, right? As like another version of Autechre. In fact, one of the fun things about listening to the Glasgow bootleg is like, I think they're already getting into chorus mode, which I think of, and we'll see, maybe I'll change my mind when I revisit that one too, right? But I think of that as much more of a precursor of current Autechre. And it almost sounds like when you listen to the Glasgow bootleg, when you hear them do Untilted tracks, it's like, this is the entity that made chorus covering Untilted or something, like reinterpreting Untilted. Yeah. And there's something kind of fun about that. But all right, wrapping up now with a couple last emails from listeners. This one from June. This is a good one. June says, fun fact for you guys. Sophie got her start on Autechre with Untilted and saw them live during that tour. That album inspired her to get her own mono machine, which all of her early releases were based entirely on. Sophie repeatedly said, the only people I'd let remix my material are Autechre. Just before Product was released, the label sent the stems to Warp, hoping to get a remix out of it. When they got the email, it said, sorry, this is so late. Hope it's still of some use. They released the remix with a vinyl release, which sadly came out the day before Sophie's death. Sharing this bit, as Sophie is the one who got me into Autechre and is one of my all-time heroes. Rest in peace. June also shared this cool interview with Sophie talking about Autechre that I'll link in the show notes. But yeah, I remember, of course, when Sophie died, and it was just right the same time that remix came out. We talked about it on the original run of the podcast. But knowing this now, I can totally hear it that like Untilted was the starting point for Sophie, especially on that Product album. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. I mean, I didn't know that, she saw him on that tour and everything. It's pretty rad.
Yeah. All right. Listener Rob, I had already started reading this about like, Rob kind of theorizing why, in his view, are they going back to kind of Untilted energy on the most recent sets? His first theory was that, these records got a little overlooked, as we talked about. His next theory is most musical acts don't make money from album sales these days, so artists tour to make the bulk of their income. This can explain why AE don't seem interested in traditional albums anymore. Therefore, whilst thoughtful, abstract sound design might be interesting and have its fans, perhaps prolonged touring is more rewarding, both financially and personally. by music that gets a crowd going. And finally, I actually think the 2022 sets from C onwards are superior to Untilted. It's like they've mastered the tunes from this era and married aspects of jazz, hip hop, and techno to make something that people are eager to see live. So yeah, a bunch of interesting, ideas that honestly could like become their own fuller discussions like that, how weird 2005 was. I also think there is something interesting happening in Autechre's world, which is like, Autechre starts, they put their name on the map by contributing to this effort by Warp and other IDM artists to kind of like move electronic music from just the club to also home listening and headphone listening and stuff. And it's interesting that with their current live stuff, they are almost deliberately, right? Like explicitly shifting back to the dance floor. And I think there's a theory that Untilted was like their first little dabbling at that,
Yeah, totally. I completely agree.
All right, last one from Rob again. I was wondering where AE stood in your experience of challenging gigs. I haven't seen them yet, but I'm predicting that they will be quite the experience. Personally speaking, the loudest, most challenging band I ever saw was Fuck Buttons at a music festival in Poland. It was so loud I couldn't get closer than about 50 meters. Can you think of any really challenging gigs, Dan?
I mean, I've seen Sun, and that's like incredibly loud. I don't know. I always go see things I'm excited to go see, so it may be challenging to whoever I dragged along with me, maybe, but generally not to myself. I saw Peter Brotzman one time. That was pretty challenging to the normal ear, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I just bought tickets to see Sun, which I've never seen before, and I'm very excited about.
Jealous.
I think the loudest show I've ever seen was My Bloody Valentine in London, like 2013. They do what's called the Holocaust section, like during You Made Me Realize, where it's just like a sheer wall of the loudest noise possible. And I just, to test it, like took off my my earplugs like for that moment. And yeah, it sounded like I was in a war zone, like literally. Also, I saw Swans not that long ago, and that was a little painfully loud. I didn't actually have earplugs, and it kind of has, he does on purpose, like the gung, 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 and each one like, makes you jump a little bit because it's like a little too loud,
Yeah. Well, he doesn't, to get off, but he doesn't use pedals. He just, like the distortion is from the amp being like too loud, so it kind of has to be like that. But yeah, I've seen Swans 6 times, I think. Challenging.
Yeah, I know there's got to be a way to answer this question that's not just volume. Dan, you and I, we saw a Grateful Dead cover band that played for over 4 hours, and that was quite an endurance.
That was challenging on my knees.
Yeah, god damn. Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, since we're starting to head in this direction anyway, we will experiment this episode with ending with new music recommendations. I guess I'll kick it off. I have been really enjoying. This is the first 2026 record I've been enjoying, but it's by Dry Cleaning, and it's called Secret Love. And they kind of had all this hype, Dry Cleaning, for the first 2 albums I guess they've already released, and they didn't really click with me. I don't know. I tried listening, didn't really connect. And this record is produced by Kate LeBon, who is somebody I really adore. So I had to check it out, and her stamp is all over it. And it's just like a match made in heaven to me. It kind of reminds me of like, I don't know. It's like The Fall, but like much more like mellow, she's doing a similar kind of like muttering over the track, but instead of like shouting like an insane homeless person, it's more just like, drifting off into like ennui or something. I mean, there's something really cool about this record. What about you? What have you been listening to?
The thing I like to do is like I'll go through a record label or something, and I've been listening to a lot of Folkways stuff. And two things I found. First, it's called Music for the Classical Oud by Khamis Fino Ali. It's from 1964. The oud is some sort of Arabic lute. It's like a fretless instrument. All these Folkway records come with like little booklets of liner notes that are like so awesome. You can find them all on the Smithsonian bought it, so on their website and whatnot now. But here he's like playing 4 of these like classical songs from Egypt. and he's just like ripping on this thing, this oud, whatever it is. But really, like, one of my favorite part is like while he's doing that, there's somebody playing some sort of drum. The liner notes actually don't like mention what kind of drum it is or anything. It sounds like some sort of hand percussion thing, like maybe a tabla or something. But that guy is just like really kicking it off. But like, so it's pretty like frenetic and stuff, but it's also like relaxing. It's like great for having on in the background, you know, while reading and stuff. Really great. The second one, it's called Electronic Music Tar and Sehtar by Dariush Dolat-Shahi from 1985. This is a record from Iran, and he's using synthesizers, all programmed, along with he's playing folk instruments, the tar, which is some sort of lute, and the Sehtar, which is like it's like a cousin of the sitar type thing. And then also he's like playing with all these field recordings, like there's like birds and frogs and just like water, so you know, like really like some Yoshimura kind of stuff, like electroacoustic tape music, you know, loops and stuff going on. I really think like anyone that's listening to an Autechre podcast would super enjoy this. I had never heard of it before. I like literally just, you know, grabbed it out of the list. But it's super great. And like I said, everything you can listen to on the Folkways website. They have their own like streaming service and stuff, and a lot of it's free too. And you can download these liner notes and stuff. But like an awesome resource that our government has not yet gotten rid of.
Well, cool, yeah, and I'm gonna put this in the show notes in case you didn't understand any of the foreign words that Dan just said.
I'm sure I said them all completely wrong as well.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's it. Next time we got a bonus episode that's going to be on Virgins by Tim Hecker. So join us. Head over to patreon.com/GONKCAST. After that, the next main free Autechre episode going to be In Vain's EP. So share your thoughts right now. You can do that on Patreon or email us, gonkcastpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, help us out. Tell a friend. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Follow us on social media. All that's GONKCAST Pod. And we'll see you next time.
See ya.